This is Mom Squad Pod, your weekly update on tips, tricks, and all things parenting with Maureen Kyle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Mom Squad, the podcast and now streaming show where we talk all things parenting. I'm Maureen Kyle, and today we are touching on one of the most controversial topics of our lifetime and something that the entire country is talking about, the Supreme Court overturning of Roe v. Wade. No matter what your political affiliation, no matter what your stance is on abortion rights, this decision is affecting women in every community. As we sit here for the recording of this show, 9 states have banned abortion. Here in Ohio, where we are among the 7 that have abortion restrictions in place. But for us, that means that abortion is banned once a fetal heartbeat is detected, which is about 6 weeks into the pregnancy. There are bills being introduced in state legislatures in many states. Those laws could change as we move forward. But today, I wanted to ask some of the most pressing questions about women's health, because in the days following the Supreme Court's decisions, there were a lot of rumors about what this means for reproductive health. I got a chance to talk to Dr. Ashley Brant, an OBGYN with the Cleveland Clinic, about what kind of care she's allowed to provide to her patients and what's restricted.
All right, so life changed a little bit as of a couple of weeks ago. Can you explain, is it difficult or is it easy to explain what kind of restrictions you're under now that Roe v. Wade was overturned? And especially since we're talking in Ohio, and we are among the states that have a more restrictive law going into place with the heartbeat law. Is it easy to summarize, or can you start to summarize what kind of restrictions you are now placed under?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide sort of a brief overview of what the new law means for us in Ohio. So under the new law, abortions are prohibited when fetal cardiac activity is detected, which normally occurs around 5 to 6 weeks from the last menstrual period. And oftentimes that's, before women realize that they're pregnant. The bill that was passed in Ohio does not have an exception for situations like rape or incest. And there are also no exceptions for things like fetal anomalies. It does include an exception for the maternal or the health of the pregnant person. So meaning that if a physician decides in their judgment that an abortion is necessary to prevent like serious harm or serious risk or even death to the pregnant person, we can intervene in those circumstances.
Are you having daily meetings? I mean, I feel like the legal analysis of what's allowed and what's not allowed has been changing as we get information. I don't know if it's been changing for you. I mean, even as we're doing this interview today, as of yesterday, we even had an update that the Department of Health and Human Services was citing a federal law from 1985 saying that hospitals must, what you were talking about, perform an abortion or intervene if the mother's life is in danger. So are there meetings, especially because Cleveland Clinic is a hospital system that has so many other locations in other states and other areas? I mean, is that something that's changing daily, or do you feel like hospitals and physicians have a good grasp on what they're allowed to do?
So I guess there's sort of 2 parts to that question. So the first is like our initial response and our initial interpretation. So those of us who are involved in reproductive health care sort of saw this coming down the road even before it happened. And so we did start preparing in advance. And part of that preparation involved working with the other academic healthcare centers and health systems in Ohio to ensure that we're all interpreting the laws consistently. And so that helped reduce some of the confusion right out of the gate when this bill was passed a little over 2 weeks ago, or enacted a little over 2 weeks ago. And the bill itself is from 2019. So we already knew that this bill was here, and we already had conversations about what it would mean for healthcare years ago. You're absolutely right, though, that there's been new information coming out, new sorts of legal strategies, I guess you could call them, being introduced, which might change the interpretation or the types of care that we're allowed to provide on the ground. The way that the health exception is written in the Ohio law, it does allow us to use our medical judgment to take care of somebody. And so the law from the 1980s that you were citing, commonly referred to as EMTALA, says that if somebody shows up to your emergency room, you have to take care of them if there's an emergency. And so our law is consistent with that, with EMTALA as well. So the announcement about EMTALA doesn't really change too much on the ground in Ohio, but it does provide some reassurance for healthcare providers in Ohio that yes, we can provide this care and we're not going to get in trouble for it.
Okay. And I mean, especially in the hours and days when Roe v. Wade was overturned, the days following, there was a lot of passionate posts on social media. Some had us all questioning what can be treated, what can't be treated. So I want to ask you about some of those more common conditions that had a lot of women concerned. And one of those that I saw that popped up was, well, now if somebody has an ectopic pregnancy, and if you can explain what that is, that they wouldn't be able to be treated. Is that true? And what can you do?
Yeah, so an ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy that occurs outside of the uterus. So a normal healthy pregnancy develops inside the uterus, and the uterus is sort of designed to support that pregnancy for the full duration of the pregnancy. You know, when a pregnancy occurs somewhere like the fallopian tube or on the ovary or even somewhere else, that is not a part of the body that's designed to carry a pregnancy for 9 months. And so those pregnancies can be life-threatening to the pregnant person. And so the law, the heartbeat law in Ohio, completely excludes ectopic pregnancies. So those are not even considered abortions, taking care of ectopic pregnancies under this law in Ohio.
Mm-hmm. And what about, I assume the same is true for like a miscarriage or something where then the D&C has to be performed. I mean, are those able to be treated?
So Ohio law also excludes miscarriage care from the legal definition of abortion in Ohio, although there is a lot of confusion around that. So we have already heard from our patients in Ohio that they are having trouble getting prescriptions filled for medications that are commonly used to treat miscarriage. And, you know, looking kind of at the bigger picture, in places and states where abortion is highly restricted, there's you know, more stringent requirements for making the diagnosis of a miscarriage and for proceeding with treatment of a miscarriage, because there's such strict penalties for performing an abortion. So there may be clinical circumstances where, you know, all signs are pointing towards this is a miscarriage, but it doesn't necessarily meet the like strict criteria for diagnosing a miscarriage. In those cases, healthcare providers in Ohio sort of err on the side of not acting, of not intervening, delaying treatment, you know, waiting, letting more time pass. And so there are some subtle differences in the way that miscarriage care is provided in Ohio, even though that is not the intent of the law.
In any of those cases where you'd have to just kind of wait it out, where a woman might have to wait until it's 100% sure, are any of those life-threatening or health-threatening, or is it pretty safe to just have the wait and see approach?
Yeah, so the main downside of the wait and see approach is that it can be unpredictable. And, you know, having a miscarriage can be very emotionally difficult. And then to start miscarrying at an unpredictable time, to not have any control over that process, you know, to be at work and to start bleeding and cramping and things like that, that can be very both emotionally distressing and also physically distressing, and can result in sort of unscheduled healthcare encounters, needing to go to the emergency room for bleeding, things like that. So there definitely are some like real downsides to sort of having to err on being extremely cautious when we treat miscarriage.
I want to ask too, because a good friend of mine who, I mean, she had a very tragic situation where her baby was developing with those anomalies that you were talking about and you referenced, where I believe, if I'm getting it right, the baby boy didn't have part of a skull. And I've heard of stories where organs are being born or being developed outside of, you know, the stomach or the chest cavity or whatever. Those are instances where, is it again a wait and see approach, or how do you treat those type of pregnancies?
Yeah, so I'm so sorry for your friend.
Mhm.
That's a really difficult position to be in, right? And it's not a position that anyone ever expects themselves or wants to be in, to have a
Mhm.
pregnancy that's complicated. Um, so, how we would manage that or what treatment options are available is going to depend on the exact circumstances of the pregnancy.
Mhm.
Prior to the heartbeat ban being passed in Ohio, if a pregnancy was complicated by birth defects or other problems with the pregnancy, ending the pregnancy or having an abortion was an option.
Mhm.
And some patients would choose to end the pregnancy, and others would plan to continue the pregnancy and give birth and spend whatever time they could, with the baby.
Mhm.
Now, with the heartbeat ban, there is no exception to that ban for birth defects. And so now in those situations, the patient would either need to continue the pregnancy or seek care out of state.
Okay. And I mean, I feel like there's a million situations. It's hard to compare. Patient is probably not exact situation to another patient. And so I know I could probably throw a million situations at you to ask about each and every one. But other than just simply a mother's choice to terminate a pregnancy, we know that that is now illegal in Ohio and several other states. Are there any other situations where treatment is restricted based on this heartbeat bill or some of the other more restrictive laws that have gone into place in other states?
Mhm. Yeah, and I just want to clarify one thing. So abortion is still legal in Ohio before the heartbeat is present. And so some patients that are able to get in very early are still able to get abortions at,
Hmm.
4 weeks, 5 weeks pregnant.
Okay.
Although that's a small proportion of the number of abortions that were happening in Ohio before this law. The law, some of the common questions that we're getting is like, does this law affect birth control? And the answer is no. There's no restriction on birth control, no restrictions on the use of intrauterine devices, no restrictions on the use of emergency contraception or other contraceptive methods.
Mhm.
We're also getting lots of questions about, does this impact infertility care, in vitro fertilization, or other assisted reproductive technologies? And the answer is no. That care can still be provided in Ohio.
Mhm. I also saw you bring that up, and I saw on social media, what about somebody who is going through IVF and 5 embryos were implanted, and now all of a sudden all 5 embryos are, viable, but in some situations, maybe that would be life threatening to the mother. Is that one of those instances where you do take a look at the mother's health as a priority?
Yeah, absolutely. So the law in Ohio says that if we suspect that the pregnancy is life-threatening or could cause serious harm to the pregnant person, we can intervene to end the pregnancy. And the exact scenarios and how that would be done is going to depend on the exact clinical situation.
Mhm. You also mentioned earlier, as we were talking about, in cases of miscarriage, where maybe there was some medications that women used to be able to get their hands on, and now that is restricted. Can somebody go and get that prescription filled or that medication over a state line in a different state if they really needed it? Do you know?
So there's a couple answers to that question. So the medication that I'm referring to is called misoprostol. It's a common medication that we use in miscarriages to help someone pass the pregnancy at a predictable time. They can take the medication and it helps induce the cramping and the bleeding, and so they can pass the pregnancy. So there are a number of steps that healthcare providers have started taking to make sure that their patients have access to that medication. For example, at Cleveland Clinic, we've started stocking that medication in our offices so that we can just hand it to patients instead of requiring that they go to a pharmacy. That medication is also available in other states, and it should probably be easier to get it in states that have less restrictive laws. And there are even some reports that people are able to order the medication online.
So overall, I mean, as women are taking a look at these laws and taking a look at these new restrictions, I think the overall concern is, will I get the care I need? And would you say that women, for the most part, are going to be able to get the care that they need if they find themselves in a situation that is life-threatening or threatening to their health?
Yeah, I want to reassure our patients and the women and the people who live in the state who can get pregnant that your healthcare providers are here to partner with you. We want you to reach out to us if you have concerns. We will do everything in our power to make sure that you get evidence-based, high-quality care that you need when you need it, without delay and with, following kind of the standards of care as much as we can.
Is there anything else that I forgot to ask that you think is really important? Any questions that you're really getting from patients, whether they're pregnant or not, just that they're calling and asking, or any of the top questions that we may not have covered so far?
Yeah, I think that we hit on the vast majority of the things that patients are asking about. There are a number of questions about what's going to happen next. There are a number of additional bills which are being introduced in Ohio that could change the answers to a lot of the questions that we discussed today. And I think we need to wait and see which bills kind of move forward and which ones are potentially will become law in Ohio before we start, addressing those questions too deeply.
We want to thank Dr. Ashley Brant with the Cleveland Clinic for giving us all of that insight. And of course, as we mentioned at the beginning of this, all of these laws are fluid. There are lawmakers introducing bills where abortion rights have been restricted, but this is the information as of July 2022. Dr. Brant also made the point that the Cleveland Clinic has an expansive legal team that is ready to back up the medical decisions that she and her fellow doctors have to make to ensure the safety of their patients, something you should ask your doctor if you feel like you are faced with some of these issues. Again, this is an issue that affects all families, all women, and we certainly will be talking about it as the laws continue to change. I'm Maureen Kyle. Thanks for joining us on Mom Squad.
Thanks for listening to Mom Squad Pod with Maureen Kyle from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now so you never miss an update. And find more on everything you heard here on WKYC.com and on the WKYC app.